Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, Navigating Amateur Motocross. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Lip Pro. My partner in crime, Mr. Derek Harris with HP Race Development. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've got Santa Claus with us here. It's like Christmas, right? It's like the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Mr. Tony Alessi. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very good. Thanks. Appreciate you guys calling me up and having me on.
Well, Derek, that comment's almost humorous to you and I, because it's like when you and I were first talking about laying out the show, I think it was either the first or literally the second person. We're like, well, if we can, I know that Tony's extremely busy, but if we can get him, what a great conversation that's going to be. And here it is. So, Tony, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, I was so excited. Glad that we can do it.
Absolutely. Derek, you go right ahead. You and I were talking before we got on the air, and I'm going to let you run with some of your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I had so many questions for Tony. A lot of your history is known. It's out there. But to recap, for a lot of people who are new-ish to the sport because time flies and we're getting old, that you had two incredibly successful boys, Mike winning 11 amateur national championships at Loretta's alone. You probably are, in my era, the most winning amateur there was. I could be wrong about that. I know James was way up there as well, but definitely you guys were right there. So you obviously did something right to get all those championships, not just with one boy who was really good, but both your boys, with Jeff being incredibly good, and they both turned into elite level pros. My first question for you was, you quit your job to go all in on this. How did you know that that was the right decision at that time? Or was it just a little bit of, we're just going to go for it?
No, Derek, it was kind of like one of these things. We were at the Texas Nationals, and in those days, I think they're different than what they are now. They were Lake Whitney and Mosher Valley, but same concept, right? Two spring nationals in Texas, right? And so we were there, and it was Villapoto and Mike, and it was the super mini class, right? And they were the race after the pro class. So like the pros race, and one race later, it was super minis. And so I'm checking the lap times of the pro riders and got those, right? And Casey Johnson was the rider that was actually winning that pro race at the time. And so then super minis were up. They're up next, and they're out there. So I'm like checking the times because track couldn't have changed that much in one moto, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at the stopwatch going, is this thing wrong? We check again. They're second a lap faster than the pros, Mike and Villapoto, in the super mini class versus the pro class. And when I got home from those nationals, it was a real wake-up call to me, right? I was like, all right, we got kids that are 12, 13 years old right now that can run pro speed. What do I do here? For these guys to go to the top level, which is to be pros, and to come in and try to be pros by 16, because they're already good enough. They have the speed, right? What do I have to do to make that happen? And initially I was like, man, if I do nothing at all, they might never be better than local pros, right? We may never reach the top. And at about the same time, we were having some problems with our riding areas, right? We were in Thousand Oaks and Moore Park area, which is in Ventura County, and we all rode the tracks at O'Mara, Johnny O'Mara, and David Bailey. They would all ride these tracks up in the hills. So we'd ride those tracks in the hills, and that's what we did for practice and training. We very rarely went to public tracks. And the cops were coming, right? It's like, shit, really? It got so bad I had to have my wife down on the street with a walkie-talkie to let me know when they were coming so we could get out of there. It was crazy, right? And they finally caught on to that because they could never get us, and they flew a helicopter in one day, and then they took all the bikes, and I was like, there's no way I'm doing this like this, right? And so if I'm going to do this to the next level, I have to move to the middle of the desert. I got to be able to build tracks, and I got to be able to put a concentrated, undistracted effort into this, right? And so it was a huge deal, right? I had to quit my job, which I was this led a department, and I only had to report to the vice president of the company. So I was in a position where I was up there pretty high. House was paid for, And my 401k had 100 and something thousand in it at the time. And I was like, okay, here we go. We're going to just sell the house. We're going to cash in the 401k and we're going to quit our job. I'm going to go buy a little house out in the desert. And we're going to take that money and we're going to use it for the next 3 years to become pro riders. And we're going to put every ounce of every focus we have at doing that. And I'm pretty sure I heard things like, you're crazy, you're out of your mind. What are you thinking from all across the board, right? But we did it. And we sold the house, we cashed it for 401k, and we went to the desert, right? And we bought a little cabin in the desert, and we went to work. And we went to work for about 3 years at that. And it was showtime, right? And it was one of the last nationals of the year in 2004. It was at Steel City. And at the time, we were working pretty close with Honda, and they wanted us to ride 250 class. But the 250 that they had at that point in time was built around different kind of power that Nathan Ramsey wanted, right? It was a little different than what we were looking for. And so we said, look, we're just going to ride the 450 class. We've been riding the 450 for a while. It's what we practice, what we ride on. We'd like to just ride that. And if you guys would be so kind to just let us use those foot pegs and that shock, it's all we need to get the job done, which they basically said, and if you don't ride the 250 class, you're going to have to ride your own bike. So we said, fine, we'll ride our own bike. And so we rode our own bike, and we got there to Steel City about a week early, and went out there and set the bike up. Initially, our bike was too fast for the track, so we actually had to slow the bike down, and got it working pretty good, did the amateur day, and then rolled out on the pro day, and posted a podium finish in the 450 class, which is unheard of for a ninth grader, right? 16 years old on a 450. Carmichael 1, Wyndham 2, Alessi 3. And Mike led actually Wyndham for a greater part of the second moto. But we actually saw that we had the overall, and we actually signaled them that said, let Wyndham by, because it wasn't going to do us any good, and we could have crashed riding at that speed, right? So it was better just to back it off. And he had a good enough lead over the rest of the guys, right? And there was a lot of amazing riders that were there that day, from Jeremy McGrath to Chad Reed, to Tim Ferry in his prime, and Nick Way in his prime, and Sebastian Tortelli, and a lot of top pros, right? So to get that podium and that field of elite guys, it was an amazing story coming true, right?
So that's basically like where you ended at. And of course, then he went on to have a full pro career that people can look up and probably already know. But basically, let's go backwards from that culmination of all your amateurs to get to that point, which is a podium in his second ever pro race, I believe it was, at Steel City against the best of the best at age 16. And if you go look at photos, and Coach will throw them in this podcast, I'm sure, Mike looked like a young ninth grader at that time. He wasn't a full developed man-child like some of these kids are. So I think people, like you said, would freak out. And that's even crazier about it, as you kind of alluded to, that was on a full privately built bike, if I'm not mistaken. That was your bike that you had built. And we'll touch on that here too, because you were really involved in building motorcycles. And it's something that we would love to pick your brain on. Kind of like what you were talking about there was things have changed a little bit today. If I remember right, y'all raced a ton when you're an amateur. Nowadays, the kids race very little and they train a lot. What would be your suggestion for families nowadays? More gate time, or is it just how the sport has changed? Maybe you can't find the races like you used to.
No, the races are there. They're always there. There's always good races. I mean, you just have to travel, right, to go to them. I mean, I have to believe that there's a good race tomorrow, right, somewhere. That's a good race where you could call it a regional level race, right, where there'll be 3 or 4 really good guys there. The track will be good. There'll be a full gate. I mean, nothing replaces racing, right? You can practice all you want, but when you roll up to the gate and there's 40 dudes on the line, are you ready for that mentally? Are you ready for that physically? I mean, there's a lot of things, right, that come into play when you're just not out doing circles, circulating the track, right? To me, nothing's better practice than racing.
Go ahead, Rob.
the one thing I was curious about, and Derek, like you were saying, setting the context, Tony, if you don't mind, when you guys moved into that house in the desert, were you guys riding the Honda CR 150F at that time?
No, we never rode the CRF 150 at all, like zero.
Okay.
So at that time, the kids were pretty young, about 13 and 14. And honestly, we couldn't even ride 80s without breaking them. We couldn't ride 125s without breaking them. And even 250s were on the bubble at that point, right?
Okay.
And so by the time that these kids were 13, 14, they were riding 450s because it was the only motorcycle that we could keep together with the kind of riding that we were doing, right? I mean, we could race them, no problem. We take race bikes out, and as long as they're out there for 15 or 20 minutes, no problem, right? But if you're out there doing 40-minute motos on the roughest tracks known to mankind in 110-degree temperature, not much lives in that environment other than a 450. And so we basically just ride a 450 for a month, never disassemble the engine at all, be stock with the pipe. And as soon as that month was over with, we would get rid of the motorcycle and get another one. And that was our kind of program when they were young kids.
You had a lot of help from Honda at that time, and you deservedly so, if I'm not I should say, I think you had a lot of help because you guys were just dominating. I mean, you're winning everything. So is that part of allowing that process to happen, or was it still a tremendous amount of money out of pocket for you to keep that bike program afloat?
So Allison Turner, who was an English lady that was our agent at that time, put together a pretty fantastic program with Honda. It was, X amount of bikes, which we could keep, right? We get the titles for them. And an unlimited parts program, which you basically press the button on the computer and the parts are there the next day. It was pretty high level, better than most pro programs, right, at the time. And so we had a credit card that we got from Honda, and whenever we would go race, wherever we went, whenever we went, right? If we were able to win the race, I would get money deposited on the credit card. So winning was imperative to living, right? Because that was our way of making a living, because I wasn't working anymore and I was there to support them guys full time. So the only way that we were making car payments and buying tires for the car and putting fuel in the car is by winning races. So when you asked earlier, you guys raced a lot. That's a big part of why we raced a lot.
Derek, this is a very volatile subject, and Tony, we don't want to put you on the spot with it. When you go back to those days, and your boys, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they do the I Want to Ride Honda commercial? Weren't they part of that commercial? Because I remember it was a big one that Honda had always ran during Supercross. I want to ride, I want to ride. Wasn't that, I just remember, I thought it was Mike that goes ripping by it at the front of the video. Or
we did a lot of different types of commercials and ads. If we were in that one, it was just one of many, right?
Okay.
We did a lot.
Yep. So the reason why I was asking is, and Derek and I have talked about this off the record, when you guys were riding for Honda, and obviously they've given you a credit card and contingency money was enough that you could live on it, how did that Honda contingency program compare to anything else that was offered to you? Or was, like Derek said, we don't want to make any assumptions here. Were you offered anything from any other color that would have even come remotely close to what Honda was putting in front of you?
So at the time we were riding for Yamaha, right? And so Mike Guerra was our manager. And so I'm always going to try to do it right? And so when we got the offer from Honda, I went to Yamaha, Mike Guerra, and said, hey, this is the offer we have. What do you think? And I remember him saying, after he looked at it, he goes, if I were to match this, this would be our entire amateur Yamaha budget to match this. So, yeah, that ain't going to happen. And I was like, no problem. I get it. I just wanted to be straightforward and be transparent. And I know we have a good relationship, and I know that we gel good with the bike, right? And in that time period, right, I knew there was a little bit of going out on a limb to ride a CR80, right, 85, because there were no Hondas at the track. Everybody was on Kawasaki's. They were all on Yamahas. No few Suzukis. Nobody rode a Honda, right? And so I knew that we were going out on a limb and we would have to develop the bike. But I knew that the program that we had set up for us would be what was needed to get us to the front, right? And to be ready to race pro racing at 16 years old. And so I picked it, we picked it. And we did it as a group, right? So at the time, it was myself. The mom had already left the program. So it was myself, Mike, Jeff, and Mike's girlfriend, Danielle, who was just a teenager at the time, right? It was us four. And yeah, that was it. We picked it, and we had one focus and one gear, right? And that was to get there.
So on that front of like one focus, one gear, and I think that was very evident watching from the outside, is like there's a focus to win races, and you're willing to do whatever you thought was necessary to get there. Meaning, from what I've understood, you keep very copious notes at every track you go to about starting positions, track, bike setup, things like that. Is there any insight like you could offer parents to maybe who are a little looser in the program? I deal with this. Me and Coach have already been on. I've been so frustrated with this on this podcast about parents being a little bit too loose with their program. And maybe even kids can kind of, maybe the kids who are 14, 15 can pick up some of your, I would call them secrets, really, if you're willing to share any of that kind of your process.
So not only did we keep notes at the track, right, but we made what we were doing public, right? And so we had a newsletter that would go out called Alessi Weekly. And we had, I think, somewhere around 750,000 subscribers at that time. It was social media before social media, right? And so wherever we went, we basically did photos and did a kind of a synopsis of what happened at that event. And we would publish it every week, and it would go out in the emails to all these people, right? And so we didn't make what we were doing a secret. It was out there for everybody to see. In terms of keeping notes and documenting what we did, we did have a journal that we kept. Most important to me were the races that we had to go to that were going to be on national tracks that we would have to race in the future, i.e. Southwick, Millville, Redbud. And so whenever those opportunities were possible to go to, then we would go to those venues, and I would spend an enormous amount of time there, right? We would go to, Southwick or Redbud or even Millville. We would go there the week preceding the event. We would stay there, check out everything, know where every detail, where the bathrooms were, where we're sign up, what the track looked like, how often did it rain, what happened when it rained there. We would ride the amateur day. Then we would stay there and watch the pros. And then the day after the pros, typically I had an arrangement with the track owner to ride the track untouched, right? The day after the pros were on it. This way I can get some kind of an indicator of where our level was at that time, right? Because we just watched him ride, right? And 12 hours later, we're on the track, and riding the same track with the same bumps and the same ruts. And so it really helped us navigate where, when, and how to go pro.
For Loretta's, you were so successful there with Mike, like unbelievably successful. I mean, it was almost double title every year. You really tackled it hard. And he had an amazingly stiff competition. People don't understand, but it's not like it was against slow guys. I think you and I have talked, not on this show before, about you never really lost to Villapoto as an amateur. And then unfortunately, as pro came, that kind of flipped roles. But you guys were super dominant at that. Was Mike just really good at Loretta's in your mind? Obviously he was good everywhere. Or was there something specific leading into that week that you were, or those, the preparation for that made you really good at that track? Like anything that you had just kind of figured out that prepared you guys for that venue?
Well, I mean, for the most part, right, you have to recognize the fact that Loretta Lynn is going to be muddy at some point in time or another, right? And so typically in the months preceding Loretta Lynn's, we would spend a lot of time at Zach Osborne's, which was up in Virginia. And we would ride in the mud with Zach, obviously, and Mike Brown, who was a regular, because he just lived down the road in Tennessee from there, right? And so we did a lot of training in the mud and being able to handle the ruts. And so I think that played out really well a lot of times. at Loretta Lynn's. I mean, obviously being a good starter was key because you have fast guys, and in that group there could be 10 fast guys, right? And so you need to be in front of those guys, right? And so he was a good starter. He was able to be in front, and typically he could handle whatever conditions were thrown his way. And I think for the most part, outside of guys like Millsaps, who were very equal or maybe even better in those environments, I think the rest of the guys that Mike had pretty covered.
One of the things that you just brought up, and Tony, I can't tell you like what you've just done in the last 10 minutes. I probably have 14 more questions because Derek and I have talked about like company loyalty and changing brands, not because the money's better, but maybe because the equipment is better. And maybe if we have time, we can come back to that. But I want to continue on with the thread of thought that you were at right there. When you talked about going and riding in the mud, did you designate a bike for the mud, or were you out there on this? One of the things Derek and I always talk about is keeping the discrepancy between your race bike and your practice bike as minimal as possible. And obviously we understand and respect that riding in the mud tears up the bikes. How did you approach riding in the mud? Did you just take your regular bike like you were doing and it just fell into that same cadence that you're replacing it once a month?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So what we would do is we'd get all our bikes at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
And it was an obnoxious number of bikes. And so we would take those down and we would dyno every single bike, right? And it was amazing, right? Because there were stock bikes. I mean, a Honda CR85 was 18 horsepower bike, right? And there were some that were pushing 22.5, 23. And obviously those immediately got taken out and they got put and tagged for stock class racing, right? Anything that was in the next category down, call it the, whatever you want to call it, the 20 horsepower range, those are mod bikes. We'd build those into mod bikes. And anything that was a little bit down from there were built to super minis. And anything that was junk, right, that was 17 or, horsepower, whatever, those became practice bikes. And so all national bikes were earmarked from the beginning of the season. And they were tagged, they were dynoed, they were tested, and they were put in their slot for the race that they were going to race. At that time, we had an airplane hangar. And inside that airplane hangar, we had stalls. And each one of the stalls would be the bike for the big national race that we were going to do. And so, obviously, if you're asking a question about going to Zach's and going trashing bikes, we were definitely trashing those 17 horsepower practice bikes, right? All high-level bikes were earmarked, tagged, and slotted for their particular use.
Did you struggle? Did he ever struggle on race day going to the discrepancy of bikes, or because you always and the other thing you did is you always pushed him on the next level bike very early, so he was always on a super mini on 85s, he was on a big bike on super minis, or was that not an issue for him going from like a weaker stock practice bike to a really good race bike?
So typically the week that preceded the race, we would go ride the race bikes, right? Because they were all 0-hour bikes at that point, like almost 0 hour. We call it maybe 20 minutes break-in time. And then we would go out and ride those bikes for a day or two. And then we'd roll them into the nationals.
Nice. You mentioned something earlier that was one of Coach Robb's big questions we had coming into here, which was Mike was an unbelievable starter. He's probably the best starter the sport's ever had in its history. So one of Robb's questions was like, how the heck did you develop that? I was a good starter just at my local level, always, everywhere I went, I hole shotted. So obviously there's some knack to it. And you see Jet Lawrence now, he's just a damn good starter. You see it with a lot of the top guys, but you guys were just next level starts. How did you develop that?
Well, I think part of it was definitely because the fact that we raced all the time, right? So we're always on the starting gate. It was pretty natural for us, right, to be on the starting gate. A lot of people, I even see pros, like even some of my pros, right? They get so wound up before the race, man. They're throwing up, they're doing crazy shit, and it's like, gate drop, that just comes like walking for these guys, right? Because they've done so many gate drops, right? And not gate drops with 4 guys in them, gate drops with, full gates of riders, right? So it was pretty natural for them. I would say that we did work on the technique, and mostly shifting was a key item, right? You have to shift in the key part of the power band, right? And so obviously, using the dyno, we could see where that is, and we would try to hit the mark every time, right? And so, obviously things will change if it's sand or mud or whatever. But knowing where that RPM is, where to shift the bike, and being able to shift the bike with the side of your boot, are all little things that most riders don't think of or don't even care of, right? And I think that because we put more focus on it, I think that we were able to be more successful than most at it.
Was Jeff, how much younger was Jeff than Mike? A year or two?
10 months.
10 months. Okay, very close. He was always bigger than Mike, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
He was bigger. He was stronger. He was more aggressive. He was better in the turns. He had a lot of things that were in his favor. I mean, he could have very easily been the best guy, right? He could have been better than Mike. But again, that's a matter of choice, right?
So that was more of just a mentality difference, just a little bit of wiring difference there on the mental side.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, mental is a big part of this.
Right. I was to say, how do you, for some of the families who have siblings who race, or even if they're big ages and big gap in ages, how did you manage the success between the two? One have a good day, one have a bad day, things like that. How were you able to come back and kind of make that work in the pits?
Yeah, typically, I mean, they were in the same class, right? So at that point, because Mike was faster, it was just mutually agreed that Mike would win the race, right? And Jeff would do what was necessary to either help in winning the race or to get his best finish that he could get in the race. As a mini bike rider, it was a little bit hard for him because he was a heavy guy. So that was a struggle a little bit. But then when he got the big bikes, his time was actually coming. But he obviously broke speed, and that was a big problem and a big setback. But he was set to surpass Mike, right? Unfortunately, he broke his feet, and that was a monumental setback.
I want to run with that thread of thought for just a moment. I've got two questions because you mentioned one, and I want to bring it up briefly. My first question would be, what's your thoughts on training just your boys versus the facility mindset where you race your competition all week long and race on the weekends? And when you come back to the idea that you had two boys that were both badasses, how did you negotiate the deals? Was it always a package deal? How did you approach that, kind of an extenuation of what Derek just asked?
All the deals were always for both boys, right? It was always together, to keep them together because they work good together. They both had a good understanding of what was needed and how to achieve it. So yeah, all the deals were always a package deal.
Okay. Because I know
training facilities, to me, I don't know. We would visit them every now and then to go ride the tracks and go check out the competition. But the last thing you want to do, in my opinion, is teach the competition how to beat you, right? And so the farther you can stay away from your competitors, the better. And the element of surprise is always the best, right? When you can show up and you lay down 4 seconds to lap faster lap time, the race for that weekend is already over with because they're mentally demolished at that point.
And see, this is what Derek and I talked about, and we're not making this comment because we have to be correct, but my statement to this question, because you can imagine, Tony, I get it from the parents. Should we go to a facility? Should we train by ourselves? And you've got the talking pundits out there. If 3 of the top 5 guys are all training together, then that's the Coca-Cola syrup. That's the ideal way to train. And then when they're not winning, that obviously it's the solo approach of AC, Stewart, still Tomac to this day. And Derek and I kind of laugh under our breath because as soon as somebody, will take your sons, as soon as they start doing well, if they're drinking green tea on Wednesday, rubbing their belly, singing Kumbaya, then that's what everybody did on Wednesday at noon. And it just, I love and appreciate how candid you are with this, because I've always been an advocate of exactly what you said. And I'm not going to name any facilities, but I could literally list you 30 people right now in a row who went in, badass dude, and all it did was everybody else that was there. The person that goes in as the badass dude gets marketed. Hey, so-and-so is at our facility. They market the daylights out of it. That athlete stagnates and goes backwards at the expense of everybody else getting better. And it's like, okay, if it happens once, it might be an oddity. If it happens a couple times, correlation, causation. But when you've got a stacking of scenarios where you see the top guy, top girl just goes down, and everybody else, like you said, why would you give somebody the cliff notes to what you're doing? I love, like you say, the element of surprise. Now, again, not because you concurred with what Derek and I agree with. This show is about opening up opinions, and you've been there and done that, and you're still doing it to this day, which I hope we'll have time to get into, and what your day job is now, which is pretty cool, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So thank you for answering those two questions. Go ahead, Derek.
So we answered a lot of topics that I had questions on, but there's a lot more there that, I mean, we could go in forever on some of it. In hindsight, Tony, anything you would have done differently, knowing what you know now, obviously the position you're in now, being a team manager at Moto Concepts Racing, and you're more than what a conventional team manager would be. You have a very deep role there. But would you say that anything you learned, obviously you always learn, so anything you would change, or how would you have adapted what you've learned now back into your program? Like, so for example, for a kid today, what are things that you guys rode motocross until you went pro? Things you would change now?
I wouldn't have put so much of an emphasis on Loretta Lynn's. The reality is it's a location that mimics nothing that you're going to race in the future, right? It's a small track. It's not a big national level track, right? Small track, mini bike track. We put so much focus on that, right? If I could have took 40% of that focus away from there and finance and put it into building Supercross and building a Supercross curriculum, I think that the careers of Mike and Jeff would have been dramatically better, right?
How much of that was you, and how much of that was sponsors and industry, Tony, that was directing you towards that race?
I don't know. I would say I'll take full blame for it. I mean, I thought Loretta Lynn's at that time was it, right? That's it. Have to win this race. We got to do everything all year long comes to this point, right? To win this one race. And so we're all in, right? And it was clearly now, years later, looking back, a crucial error, right? Because what I should have had in there was elements, time devoted to learning to hit whoops, time to learning how to hit the rhythm lanes. And we should have been doing this at an equal level to what we were doing to try to achieve wins at Loretta Lynn's. It would have been worth it to have half the amount of wins if we could have put half the amount of time more into Supercross, because in the big picture, Supercross is 90% of the value of your rider, right? And if you can't hit whoops, and there's new kids that are coming up every day that cannot hit them, right? That we've seen had huge success at Loretta Lynn's over the last 4 years, right? And because their inability to hit whoops hard and fast, it's basically minimized those guys to average or less, right? And it was no different for us. It was a big shock for us. Day one, riding Supercross at the KTM test track. Casey Lytle, a former pro rider, was the test rider for KTM, and he was 4 seconds a lap faster than Mike. And I was like, realized the hugeness of the mistake that was made.
If you don't mind me asking, because I get this question quite often, and again, if you're not at liberty or desire to speak, don't. There's a lot of grumblings that the contingencies double, sometimes triple at Loretta's to other amateur nationals. Was that the case when you guys were there?
No, it was the same. Our contingency was our contingency. It mattered not, right?
Okay.
Contingency at Loretta Lynn's mattered not. The money that we earned during the week with our normal Honda contingency that we had on our card, right?
Yep.
Where we can go to a race on a Saturday and a race on a Sunday, or maybe a fairgrounds race on a Wednesday night. That's where we earned a living, right? We didn't earn a living at Loretta Lynn's. We went to Loretta Lynn's to do our job, what we got paid for the rest of the year, which was to go there and win.
That makes sense. Derek, one of the things, if you're okay with it, Tony, when you decided to go back into the desert there, and you were talking about running a 40-minute moto, when you guys were still on 85s, what would be the longest moto you would have either of the boys do or both of them do?
Typically the motos were 25 to 30 minutes, something that mimicked like Loretta Lynn's. So if 25 minutes is actually the time at Loretta Lynn's, it would probably been 5 minutes longer, probably 30 minutes.
And did you have them doing a lot of off the bike work, or was it the majority lion's share just on the bike?
No, one of the key items that, I mean, we had an advantage at that time is that a lot of people didn't have good knowledge of how to be fit and how to be able to sustain a high level of output for a long time. And so we did a lot of crazy low intensity heart rate training. Like I would say they were probably doing something like 225 miles a week on, basically 120, 125 heart rate, super low heart rate. And so, I mean, their cup was pretty full when they came to the races. And most of these kids out there, they're just hammering motos, and they don't do anything to fill the cup back up to build their endurance. So when they come to the race, they're at, call it, the battery's at 20% and our battery's at 100%, right? And it's like, how do these guys do what they're doing? And no one had any idea of it, because that mindset didn't exist back in those days. They didn't know that endurance training was based on low heart rate, right? Training.
How did you find this out? How did you, I mean, obviously you had some research, you put the time in. Did you cross train, or did you find people from other sports, or did you work with someone? Because me and Robb
did Jeff Spencer come over and talk to you while you're on Honda? I mean,
yeah, I was going to say, me and Coach have talked about this a lot. This is a big thing for Coach, where kids at facilities are grinding themselves into the ground nowadays, and they show up on race day, not like you said, but their battery's low.
Yeah. Just basically following the breadcrumb trails, right? The top guys are not going to show you the way, right? You have to find it and figure it out and sniff it out and be a detective and figure it out, And in those days, that's what it took. And we finally got to the right people, right? That said, you see that guy's jersey on the wall? No, Jeff Stanton. Oh, okay. You see that guy's jersey on the wall? You start looking around. You're like, yep, I'm in the right place now. And obviously you follow the cue and you build.
Well, in this, I'm going to rip a scab off here, Derek, so hang on tight. It's going to bleed hard. Why on God's green earth, then, if we run with your thread of thought there, you see where success is at, and you see how it's being done. Like you said, you're your own investigative reporter, which I love that. And then people will see it, you're going this way with success, and then people will go and do the exact opposite.
It's typically group mentality, right? Herd mentality. They all want to be together and be cool, right? And this is the way, right? I never wanted to follow that way. I was always on the outside of that. I was always criticized for that because we were different, right? We did it different. We thought different. But our success spoke for itself, right?
And that's the part that blows my mind. Our dear friend Johnny Hopper always says, if you find yourself on the side of the majority, you might want to reconsider your ideology. And like to your point, though, Tony, here you guys are extremely successful, but you're doing it differently. And I say this to Derek all the time. We're supposed to be the smartest species on earth, but yet we continue to make the same repetitive mistakes. And my biased opinion is, I think so many people are petrified of success that they'll do anything they can to self-sabotage. And I'll have an adult conversation with anybody about this if you want to keep it amicable. If you're not so petrified of success and you see, we'll use yourself as an example, if you see what they're doing and it's being done differently and the results back it up, then why do you continue to go over here with abysmal results? If that doesn't validate that people are petrified of success, I don't know what else does. And it's funny. I've talked to Jeff Ward about this. I've talked to so many of these, Jeff Stanton and all these guys, where it's like when we weren't racing, and Derek, you know, we're talking about even today, they're out running and they're swimming and biking. You can call them a triathlete. You can call them triathlon training. But to your point, though, low heart rate, I say this all the time. So many people make the mistake of thinking the only way to build speed is to do speed work. Well, if that's the case, then if I were to offer you a $100 bill and give you two bike options to get to 60 miles an hour, you can choose from a 65 or a 450. Every person would choose the 450. Well, why is that? Well, duh, Rob. It's got a bigger piston. Okay. Well, on the human being, what is your human piston? Your strength base. Hey, what's the biggest limiting factor on a motorcycle once the CC displacement is there? Air fuel mixture. Just go to altitude. So, okay, your aerobic engine is your carburetor. Your strength base is your size of your piston. Well, if it's easier to go faster when you're strong and it's easier to go faster when you have a bigger engine, right? So now you've got bigger piston, bigger carburetor equals bigger muscle base, strength base, and aerobic engine equals faster top end speed, longer you can go before you get tired. And I, just for the sake of the listeners, I promise you, Tony and I did not talk before this call, because Derek, you've heard me say this a million times.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
talked about this.
I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've talked.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
You've been kind enough. You and I have texted a few times. I obviously reached out to you based on the last situation that you've gone through. But yes, sir, you're exactly right. And I just want to make sure this is why this is why I'm balding, man. This is why I'm balding right here. It's like I say to Derek, we're supposed to be the smartest species, but the amount of self-sabotage that people will go to. And the other thing is, and I want to get your opinion on this, and I want to phrase this question very, very carefully and delicately. It appears on the outside looking in that when it comes to accountability and responsibility, it seems like you set the bar very high for both Mike and Jeff. I don't know. I can't speak for Derek. Derek can articulate on his own. On my side, as soon as somebody goes out and they shit the bed, the first thing that happens is the first complaint is, I got arm pump and I got tired. So now, of course, now the parents look at us and go, obviously your program doesn't work for my little Johnny. And I go, well, hold on here. We've trained now for 3-4 months. We've done some testing. You've seen the incremental improvement. You've seen the improvement in sleep. You've seen improvement in all the recovery. Top end speed is there. Consistency is there when we're not at the track. Now, how come all of a sudden when we go to the track and there's 35 other good riders, now all of a sudden it's a fitness issue? How did you approach, let's say Mike or Jeff shit the bed on the start, which was obviously very rare. Maybe they blew the start and couldn't get through the crowd, or maybe Mike or Jeff did very, very well on the start and kind of went backwards. Rare, but let's say it happened. How did you approach that with them?
It was always the kind of our policy for the most part. If you gave it 100% effort and you finished 1, 3, 5, whatever, that's fine. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's if there's no effort. Now we have a problem, right? And there's always going to be another race and another race and another race. So it's like, I mean, the goal is just to build them in their mind, confident enough to get starts and know that they have the fitness and the strength to stay there, and they have the ability to battle with anybody that wants to bring the fight to the table, right? And as long as you can keep building them to that kind of mindset, you got good warriors that are ready to race anybody in the world.
Derek and I talk about this quite often. I personally believe that you built, I call the confidence the slippery C word, because if I say to you, okay, you're a badass on a 125, I'm gonna shrink you down to a 65 or an 85 size, and I want you to line up. How do you think you'll do? Oh, I think I'll kill it. Okay, now I'm gonna put you on a growth machine, and I'm gonna have you line up at the Outdoor Nationals this weekend. How do you think you'll do? Oh, I think I'll shit the bed. Well, where did the confidence go? 15 seconds ago, you were very confident. Now it just slipped through your hand like sand. How did you approach confidence? And it's kind of a twofold question. What would be something that would have jeopardized the boys' confidence? And then how did you reestablish confidence when things went the wrong direction? Were you able to nip it in the bud quickly, or was it a long process?
It's funny that you said that about what you're saying. When Mike was a kid, he went to a Gary Bailey school, right? And he went over there and he had 85, right? They were doing the stuff. And Gary Bailey posed the question as everybody was sitting down. And he said, how many of you here think that you would be able to go to an outdoor national? Same words, right? And who thinks that they could actually accomplish it and be in the top 10? And nobody said a freaking word except for Mike Alessi. Raised his hand and said, top 10? I'm going to go there to win. And he said, I can get top 10 today on a super mini. But he said that because he knew, because he's already been to these tracks, right? He knew what his level was already, right? And in those days, a lot of those participants weren't razor focused on racing. They still had a lot of things that they did outside the box that was not helpful, right? Mm-hmm. And so he knew there was only maybe 5 or 6 guys that were really good, right? That were really committed and dedicated. And so he said it with confidence. And I always used to say, like in my notes, that this guy is the most confident rider I've ever seen, right? And so it was very, very hard to deviate that, especially as an amateur, right? The first time I ever saw him lose confidence was when he had a big crash in the whoops, right? Because lack of experience, trying to do stuff and didn't have the knowledge or the backup or the know-how to do it. That was the first time, and that was a key chink in the armor, right? That's when it first started, right? And that's why I tell riders, like I remember telling Ryder D Francisco's dad when he was a kid, I was like, hey, I don't care how much you have to spend. You have to spend $100,000. You better go hire somebody before Ryder gets to pro and make sure he hits whoops, and is confident in whoops. Like to the level of the first lap of practice, he goes out and skims them right away out of Supercross. You got to get to that level of confidence, right? And again, that goes back to where our key error in the whole thing, right? And we should have been riding Supercross way younger, way more often. We would have had a lot more experience, which then leads to better technique, which then leads to confidence, right? So
off this conversation, Tony, it's pretty obvious with your mentality, the way you approached it, and then now what you're saying on like what you should have done a little bit more. You go look at the Degans, it's pretty darn obvious why the success level they're having. Obviously, they basically implemented everything you're talking about now. He got early on in Supercross. He obviously hit tons of races. He went to the national tracks. They did all of the things that you're talking about that you had basically set the bar on. I mean, not all these amateurs go to all the national tracks. You did that. I mean, we had a conversation a few months ago about how you stayed at Millville for a little period of time because it was a great track, great facility, and that's where you wanted to go pro after Loretta's. So you put time in on that. But yeah, I think Deegan was shocked. He did say in an interview he was shocked that when they thought the level at pro was higher than it was. But I think the reality is their preparation level towards Supercross was just so much farther ahead of what any amateur's really done before. I mean, he was riding it on 65s.
Yeah, that's the element that we missed, right? And I would imagine, Mike Alessi's worked with Deegan quite a bit over the last years, whatever. So I'm sure that a lot of that, I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine a lot of that Mike shared, right? Right. If he could have done it differently, he would have spent more time in Supercross and a lot less time chasing Loretta Lynn's.
What you guys went so let's talk about equipment. You did something. How did you get here? So I don't even I'm wordless because you do things that I tell parents to do and they just refuse to do. So for example, when I got my dyno, this is now 15 years ago, I expected it to be busy every day with dads in the area who just wanted to know what they had. Whether they used my shop or not, I figured, hey, I'm going to call up this shop. We're going to bring our bike by. If I built it from so-and-so, and I'm just going to see what my bike does. Or we're going to go dyno 5 bikes. You said the stock bikes. All the stuff that I do to try to make my products good, all the stuff you were doing trying to make your kids win seems obvious to me, which is, hey, we should know what we have. How did you approach your motorcycles? It's obviously not just about horsepower. It's about the bike, the chassis, every little piece of it. But you were very involved in the motorcycle, and you still are today. How come you were one of the few dads actually doing that? Or maybe there were more doing it than I know. But I mean, I've worked with a lot of these top kids now who don't even know what they have. They have no clue. They don't even try. They just go out, send out money, and think that what they have is good.
I mean, like I said, we committed a lot of time to it. I was fortunate enough to be able to not have to go to work and to dedicate all my time to it. So my job was that, right? And so, in terms of suspension testing, at that time, we were with Race Tech, and they had really good guys that were working there, and they were cool, right? Because we knew where Pro Circuit did a lot of their testing, and so we would go to that track. It's off the beaten path track. And I'd bring the Race Tech guys out there and they would set my bike up, right? And I knew if my bike worked good there, it was going to be at least 80% good everywhere else, right? And so that was one thing, suspension setup and all that. And then obviously engine development changed as they grew older, right? When they were younger kids, call it in the 10-year-old range, they needed, even 11, they needed bikes that had a lot of like acceleration, like right off the bottom. But as they grew older, they didn't ride there anymore, right? They were always at the top. And it was really hard to convince the engine builder that I was using for a number of years when they were kids to move that, because in his little dyno program that he had, you could actually race the bikes, right? You could drag them with, like this engine setup versus that engine setup. And his engine setup that always had the like bottom end pull out of the corner would always win the race. But the reality is it was different on the racetrack, right? On the racetrack, in a race, you needed that bike to be long pull, right? Because those national tracks, like Lake Whitney and Mosier, and they were long, fast tracks, right? You needed the bikes to really have legs, right? And so, and we ended up changing engine builders, and then and the new engine builder that I gave the directive to agreed and followed. And it's very important that everybody's on the same page, right? That everybody agrees, not that somebody thinks the direction should be different, but they all agree on the direction, right? And so we went that direction, and I don't think that we lost a race something like 3 years, right? In mini racing, and that was no matter where we went. Yeah,
you guys had a really good. I mean, everybody thought you had the best bikes, or at least close to it. And obviously, I mean, not to dredge up any negatives or anything, but they thought they were so good that somebody actually decided to put money down and buy one of your bikes at one point. So, at the end of the day, like, your bikes were coveted, and I hate it. Like, obviously, this is what I do every day, and I don't think some parents don't understand. We're not just trying to market. Like, I actually like building bikes. It's something that I like to do. So you basically took on that role and said, hey, I'm going to manage this. I'm going to test this. I'm going to know what does what. I mean, you still do this to this day as a part of your race program. You're intimately involved in your motorcycle, and you know everything about it. To me, this is just a no-brainer, but I just can't believe that more families don't take that approach. Now, at that time, you must have picked up some good help. Obviously, you're Alessi, you're winning races, so it must have helped out whoever you're working with. Did that cost you a lot of money at that time as well, like having to be able to have that program, or you managed to work it out in a way that it was advantageous for who you work with?
Most of those programs in those days were full sponsor programs. I mean, I remember when I went and talked to George at FMF, and I told him, hey, I need you to, I can't believe I said that, but yeah, I went in there, and I mean, you couldn't even do that today, I don't think. But I went in there and said, I need you to build me a custom pipe. I need you to build a pipe that is different than the pipes that you sell. And I need you to build it around this motor package, right? And they did, right? I mean, they did incredible things for us, right? And a lot of those sponsors that were out there were willing to go above and beyond, right? What is the norm, right? I mean, because that's a whole deal, right? To build a pipe from scratch based on what our engine spec was. It's craziness, right? But we were able to do things like that. Fuel, we were able to get custom blended fuel. I mean, obviously within the legal limits. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that we were able to do that other people weren't that far in, right? They were more at what they could either get or buy, right? And we were pushing towards what will it take to make it absolutely the best it can be, right? And so if you can get your partners, your sponsors on the same page with you, sky's the limit.
In hindsight, was that a mistake? Would it have been better to be on slightly lesser amateur equipment to let him battle it out a little bit more?
Hard to say, right? I mean, our focus is always to go there and win the race, right? And so not to start fifth and not to pass guys, is to start in front of them and win the race, right? Obviously, getting the start is the only place on the track that I know where you can pass 20 guys in one straightaway, right? And so we never thought like that. Our thinking was always based on win the race, right? Race to win, and do what it takes to win the race. So I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I hear what you're saying because, then when everybody else caught up, obviously when they get onto factory teams and now all the bikes are very equal, right? I hear you. You know what I'm saying? It's a big boost for a lot of those other riders. And as for us, I mean, I've said it 20 times. I was like, man, I should have just, when we turned pro, I should have just ran our own team, right? And not went to a factory team and just said, look, we want those bikes and those parts, but we'll run our own program. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's like Cowie. Like me and Rob, was it you and I talked about this, that we think Kawasaki running the way they do now, which is, let's be honest, and I'm not talking, bad on the brand, but the Kawasaki's outdated on the 85 side of things. But if they can find a kid who can win on that bike, then they know pretty darn solidly that they're going to find a kid who could be pretty good on a 250. And I think we're starting to see that's a little bit of their program, which is, hey, we know this bike's maybe not the best bike on the track, but it's capable, if you want it to be, of winning at this level, so that we know, you know what I mean, that we can select you for a 250 program and you're going to be a good rider.
Hey, Derek, real quick, just because you and I were talking about this early this week, Tony, from your perspective, because now obviously you're very involved, like Derek said, you're very involved in the existing race program that you're managing. How did the sponsors, if you went to FMF and said, can you make us a custom pipe, how would FMF recoup those R&D dollars that they developed for you? Because you sounds like, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one of the things I've always respected about you, and I've talked, and not so much talk, but I've heard other people when they reference you, is that not only did you ask for a lot, but you were really big on making sure that the people who invested got a return on the investment that they put in. And that's always piqued my interest. Derek and I have talked about it numerous times, including this week, where most good throttle jockeys come in, palms are open, I'm fast on a dirt bike, gimme, 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 gimme. And like Derek and I are saying, we love the sponsor, but we have to run a business that has to be profitable. We need branding, we need recognition, etc. How did you get an ROI? And then I also want to know, how did you do such a good job of maintaining a relationship with your boys, still being father, son, but being manager, mechanic? I know you said you had an agent, but you were obviously involved with a lot of those. I'm very intrigued to get your opinion on that. But how did you bring an ROI back to those that were willing to custom make something like that, as you articulated?
Well, I mean, the key factor is just, advertising what it is that you're doing, right? And what you're using. And you can use select words, right? Got that whole shot on that FMF. With that FMF pipe, you can phrase things in there, right? So that you bring awareness to the products that are out there, and to the general public, right? And a lot of them, right, they just want to be on board, like you said, herd mentality. So if they think that the FMF pipe is what's responsible for you getting starts and winning races, they're going to go buy one,
But correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I was told by several people that you would never say that you were using something unless you were using it. Is that true?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean,
I think that I just commend you so much, because we all know that there's people that'll say one thing and do something different. But I've heard from literally over a dozen people that said one thing that Tony would never do is say he's using something that he's not. And Derek and I, for us, that's, to me, that kind of loyalty and that honesty and that integrity is hard to find. So didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify.
No, I mean, that's a big part of it, right? I mean, that stuff won't be on our bike or in our program if we don't believe it's the best.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
No chance. Even to today, it works like that, right? I'll give you an example of that on the pro race team side of things, right? We're one of the very few teams that are out there that run a Krapovic pipe. And the reason that I run it is because it's better than everything else that's out there. It has better dyno numbers, it passes sound, and it has the best quality. And I mean, I could get paid from our team could get paid from multiple teams or multiple suppliers of pipes, right? I buy a Krapovic pipe. I buy it. We buy it because it's better than the rest, right? And so that's an instance of this, and that's what we did then too. Anything that was on our bikes in those days was the best in my mind, and our program to win.
Yep.
You're very successful now working with your pro guys. And I joke with my friends, I call you the pro whisperer, because it seems like you can bring somebody on board to your program and they get noticeably better than they were before they came. And I feel like this is super rare within the industry. I mean, for the most part, a lot of these riders, I mean, how often do they get better, especially if they've been around a few years? So I mean, you've done it with multiple guys. I mean, your career now is getting, I hate to say it, but you've been around quite a while. You've been really successful. Justin Brayton winning Daytona in his twilight years as a pro, which is an unbelievable accomplishment. You had Vince Freeze. I mean, let's be honest, he would not be around if it wasn't on your team, and yet he's unbelievably good on your team. I know people hate him, but let's be honest. He's a top 10 450 pro against unbelievably good past champions. What you did with Oldenburg, I'd say he's every bit as good as he was at Star when he left there and coming to you. And then the same with this year with Carson Mumford. You brought him from, he's really been struggling as a pro, you could say. I'm not trying to talk down on him, but just saying he didn't quite find his way as a pro. And he had an amazingly good year this year, showed a lot of speed, was really good on the 450. I mean, all the things you did have made him better. What's the secret sauce here for you?
The first thing to clarify right away, the team is Mike Genova's team. I work for Mike.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of this comes from the top down, right? Mike is a very successful business owner. He has taught me so many things, right? In regards to running the team and how to relate to the riders, how to relate to people around the riders, right? And so I want to make sure that credit goes where credit is due. There was a joke before, it was like just the accountant, right? But he's so far from that, right? He's involved with this team on a day-to-day basis. He's involved with the riders, the mechanics, and everything we do on a day-to-day basis. And I would say that much of what I know these days about running a race team has came from the collaboration of working with him, right? I want to make that super clear. So the environment is key, right? To running a race team, the environment with the riders and the crew, right? There always has to be and maintain a positive vibe. If that vibe is in any way disturbed, damaged by outside influence or a family member or whatever, it's very critical that we correct it immediately. So first and foremost, positive vibe has to be there all the time. The second most critical part of this is that we want the riders to give their best effort on every time that they're on the track. And if that's a 1, 5, or a 7, we hug you and kiss you the same way if it's a 15th, right? We don't put pressure on riders to get results. We want them to not feel that pressure, right? Because the pressure is what makes these guys crash. And I would much rather have a guy, if his level that day was a 6 or a 5, to get a 6 or a 5 than to try to push for a 2 and end up broken, and then he's sitting on the couch for 3 months. And I think as long as the riders know this and they believe it, then we're going to see those guys every week. And every week that they ride and race and practice and train, they're going to improve. It's just the way it's going to be. They're just going to keep getting better. And I think that's a lot of our philosophy with the team.
You said something there that was like interesting to me, which is not what I observe, but it's obvious you're correct. But I see a lot of riders putting in laps, logging laps, not getting better. So a lot of these guys are just kind of going through the motions for whatever reason it is. You see it at the amateur side where kids have just been doing this for 6 or 7 years, and versus their competition, they're at the exact same place they were. Same with pros, some guys lose their way. So something there, like you said, the vibe, but something there about your approach on practice day, or maybe how analytical you are. I mean, it's like, are you every day in practice finding 1 or 2 little things to improve upon with the guys? Each guy has like a little focus point, or, hey, we're going to get better at this week, or in this off season, we're going to get better at that. Is that something that you really focus on, like little focus points?
I mean, we're always trying to improve the bike and the riders, right? So that's an ongoing thing. I go to 90% of the practice and test sessions, I'm with the riders. So I know what they're thinking. I know where their weak spots are. I know the things that they're desiring. And so it's always just progress, right? You're just constantly developing and trying to improve, right? Polishing the stone as much as you can. Make the bike better, make the rider better, make his fitness better, make his mental game better, right? I mean, you're always polishing the stone and making it better. Yeah, you don't just go to the track to just do laps, right? There's always a purpose. And when we do have grind days, right? Days where these guys are actually racing each other, right? I try not to do it too much, not to blow them up, right? But we do have days where we're racing, right? We're racing at the practice track.
Yeah, we refer to that as the familiarity principle. You've got to be familiar, whether it's like you said earlier, what is race intensity, familiarize with it. We refer to it as critical speed and threshold of fatigue. How fast can you go on the track given today's conditions, and how long can you maintain it within 1 second of laps and physically be able to sustain it 22, 28, 31 minutes? At that point where you fall off the pace, that's your threshold of fatigue. If it's at 17 in January, it needs to be 21 by February 15th. There's always got to be that incremental improvement. But it goes back to, like Derek said, obviously we all live in a world of zeros and ones where everything has to be quantified. I can create confidence in an athlete if I have some way to quantify physical improvement. Otherwise, it's just a nebulous idea that, oh, you're just a great guy. No, dude, your strength to weight ratios are better. You're going faster at a lower heart rate, the consistency in your lap times because of stabilized blood sugar, et cetera, et cetera. How do you, if you don't mind me asking, how did you do such a great job of maintaining father-son when you had two incredibly accomplished athletes?
I had two pretty different kids, actually, to be straightforward with that. Mike was really good at like we would do these kind of like little meet around the table things, right? He was really good about listening and believing, right? And he would take almost notes, right, on everything. He would go back after that and watch video. I mean, he was really an awesome student of the sport, right? And I think for the most part, because he followed the curriculum, right? He didn't question the curriculum. He just believed that what we were saying and talking about and building, he believed in it so much that I think it's one of those things of what you think about is what you bring about, right? I mean, everything was geared to win the race, and he believed if he did all of these things, he would be the best guy. And I don't think Jeff bought into that as much as of that. I don't think he was as much a student of the sport. He wanted to have a couple of outside hobbies. And as you can see, right, there was a difference, right? The more focused you are, the more dedicated and committed you are, the better your results are going to be.
I think you said the buy-in. This year, it's pretty obvious with Cody Schock. He has bought in. You can just see. He just went to the programs, probably the best program he's had, the best bike he's had, all these factors. And I think he just bought into committing to something for an off season, and then his results were the best he's ever had. So that's got to be huge on that side of things. Do you think kids nowadays, I guess we could say at different ages, we talk about cross training a little bit, or like multi-sport athletes, things like that. Do you think there's any value in that? Like having a kid who can do other activities, kind of quote unquote, be athletic? Because we always joke kids can't throw footballs and baseballs and motocross anymore. They just don't have the background or skills at that.
I'm really not the one to probably ask about that. I feel like, this sport takes every bit of thought and focus and energy and effort that one has, right? I couldn't imagine, how you could do that, right?
At what age would you say? Like, do you think kids should commit at 10? Or do you think like, okay, we should get serious at like 14, 15, or you know what I'm saying? At what age in your mind?
I think when you can do a pro lap time.
Okay.
I think when you can do a pro lap time, I think then it's time to say, maybe I am good enough. Maybe I do have the stuff. Maybe I do have the talent. Maybe I do have the skills. Maybe I can do this, right? but never be unrealistic with yourself, right? I mean, if you're 10 seconds off the 30th place pro rider, you're not really even close, right? You got some stuff to do, some work to do.
Yeah, that's true. And like you said, Mike was that fast on a Super Mini. I mean, I was at Millville years ago. I don't remember what year it was. I don't know, for some area regional, and it was Jeremy Martin was on a Super Mini at that time frame, the fastest guy on the track at Millville, which is the horsepower track, on his Super Mini. So it was pretty obvious that he was going to be fast.
Yeah, we did it. We spent a lot of time at Millville with Jeremy and Alex when they were little kids. Got in trouble there one time, right? On one of the practice days, the boys, they a lot of times when they did practice, they practiced a little hard on each other, right? And I don't know what happened. Somebody bumped somebody, and then one of them cut across the grass over there at Millville and tore the grass up. And John was not that pumped, right? And I think we had to the penalty on that was they had a weed whack Bikini Hill. I don't know if you know which one that is. They had a weed whack Bikini Hill, the entire hill, before they were allowed to ride at the track again. And I remember how bad the blisters they had on their hands after doing that. But we used to go there and then we showed those kids a lot, in terms of like how to do some basic training, and they were just little kids right at the time. I mean, Ryan Dungy would ride there, and he was like a mid-pack kid, right? It was crazy that he got as good as he did. So we would spend a lot of time at those tracks, and a lot of those kids that were really good at those tracks all came good, right? In the future, including obviously Jeremy, right?
Tony, one of the things that I always say to my clients is, and I love the fact that you talked about the idea of you've got to have fun, right? This is a long journey. It's a lot of work. You've got to have fun. What was the reward system that, and I know you said you've got boys that were completely different than one another, but I refer to it with my clients as, what is your currency? I've got a doctor friend of mine, and in his examination room, he's got a poster. It says, I want to go back to when M&Ms were more valuable than money. And I always love that example because, when you're 10 years old, you everything's about M&Ms. And then as you get older, it's your cell phone, and then it's your driver's license, and then you just fill in the blank. How did you keep, and I say this, having the privilege of working with AC for as many years as I did when he was on a Super Mini, when you are the pinnacle that everybody's after, it's difficult to keep that athlete focused on being even better. We used to do it when AC was training. He obviously trained with Zach Freeberg. So we would always say, all right, our goal at Loretta's is to try to get AC Super Mini into the top 10 fastest lap times at Loretta's. That's the type of incentive AC needed. What was Mike's currency with all the success that he had had? How did you find ways to keep him? And then when he did get his 9th, 10th, and eventually his 11th championship, how did you, or what did he desire for reward?
I mean, Mike Alessi has always been, was, is, and is now a coin-operated guy, right? And so what does that mean? It means do good and get to buy good shit, right? I mean, I remember if you want to go to when he wanted to get a motorhome, right? So we had to win some races. We had to be in the hunt for the championship, right? And before that, when he wanted to get his first, truck, right? And so nothing was ever handed to Mike. Everything was earned all the way down to when he first started riding. I remember Mike Smith, a friend of mine, right? Good friend, Mike Smith, right? And he was actually the VP of the company that I worked at when I was younger. I used to work at a trash company called GI Rubbish, and so he was like the VP, and I worked head of a recycling division. So anyway, we lived pretty close to each other. His kid Kyle rode with Mike. They always kind of rode together, right? And when Mike was a little kid, right? So hey, we still laugh about this till today, really, actually, when we talk about it. Things were earned items, right? Things like gloves, goggles, they were earned items. You had to do X, Y, Z in this particular moto. You had to maintain this kind of speed or this kind of lap time to earn it, all the way down to, oh, wait a minute, ketchup for your hot dog? No, that's an earned item. You get your hot dog, but you might not get ketchup or your hamburger. So Yeah, but this is stuff that we laugh about now, but this is when they were little kids, right? Like, I don't know, 5 years old, 6 years old. Cole Seeley used to ride with the kids too, and yeah, it was just kind of a funny thing, and sometimes we would, when they were even little kids like that, we would do little races and little podiums, and if you won the race, you'd get $10, and another one of the kids that was up there, and he owns a company now called Aftermarket Minis, this is John Faulkner. He'll remember this. We used to do these backyard PW races, right? And we'd have different tracks in different people's backyards, right? And some of them made elaborate tracks, right? Like this one.
And hopefully he'll be able to come back in. We'll give him a chance and we'll see here. But, while we wait for Tony to come back, I love the way he was just talking about the idea that he had to earn everything. You and I have talked about it. My first motorcycle was a 78 RM80 steel tank, steel dual shock in the back. But we ran from the police officers to go ride in the orange groves here in Central Florida. And we rode in the orange groves and we were like pigs covered in slop. And then we trying to get back home without getting, we tried to push it as much as we could, but having the patience of a 10-year-old, it's not very fun. And I do agree with what Tony is saying there. It's hard for me working with a young athlete who's got, two mod bikes, 2 stock bikes, and they're complaining that one of the bikes has a little bit of hours on it, tired, and their practice track is dry. It's very difficult for me to be very empathetic in that environment.
No, but I love the fact that they have like Buddy, they have like these PW tracks and it's elaborate. I love that. Like that to me is really where racing starts. And obviously it started for the Alessis there.
Yes.
PWs and all their buddies having tracks. I mean, honestly, I've just been smiling and geeking out this entire interview. I feel like this should be exactly what people should hear from. Who else do you want to hear it from? I mean, guys been a goat of amateur racing. I mean, and actually it's funny, James Stewart set the record at 11. Alessi followed him at 11, but didn't pursue another one because they wanted to go pro by 16, all the things that were the same.
Yep.
And it's just interesting to see like pretty impressive. Now, obviously they were hyper focused on winning. So, we may, like we said, may disagree on whether or not they should have the best bikes or not, or this or that, but yeah, definitely interesting. He might have, maybe his phone died or something. I haven't heard.
Yeah, the way it just cut out there.
Yeah,
I would have been very interested. And, we've talked a lot about that. I love it when the parents are like, okay, I've hired Derek. Derek, you're my motor guy. You're my suspension guy, but I'm going to stay dad over here. I'm going to learn. I'm going to try to do everything I can, but I'm going to stay dad mode. If I go to a facility or if I hire a riding coach, and I was actually talking to somebody earlier today, I hope parents are very open to the idea of please be receptive to trying a lot of different riding coaches, and riding coaches that get butt hurt because you go and you work with somebody else. I mean, I've got my own certified coaches, right? And we encourage them, go listen to somebody else, because you might pick up one small nugget that puts all the pieces together that maybe one of my CRS coaches has been teaching. But as the old saying goes, until we put it in a format that it finally clicks. But this whole idea, you went and worked with Derek, so now I'm not going to take you back in. That's so petty. I mean, that's such high school stuff.
Imagine, Shorty said this, and it actually resonated with me in a way that I know, but the way he said it was good for me. So like learning from other people, learning how to learn and learning how to teach. He said, maybe I don't explain it correctly for my son. I need to be better to explain what they need to hear.
Amen.
And that's a challenge in life, which is, what you're talking about. You explain it in your mind. That makes perfect sense. But then the rider says, they're not doing what you want. And you're like, what is going on here? Well, maybe the way you process just doesn't work for them.
Yep.
It's obviously trying to teach it in multiple approaches, but sometimes that teacher or riding coach can't do that. So well, maybe the other riding coach can.
Think about the difference between fact and truth, right? If I take my pen and I drop it, it's a fact that gravity is going to pull it to the ground. I can say it's the truth because I can spin it with my own ideology. And that's the part that I love about the moto world that we live in, because I can promise you that if you get aggressive with the front brake and you learn how to shorten the wheelbase, you will be the master of inside ruts. You can't come into an inside rut with the wheelbase in different zip codes, especially with these Austrian brand bikes. Think about it. When these KTMs came out, Huskies weren't out, and obviously gases weren't. When these KTMs came out, everybody, what everybody compare it to? Man, that Suzuki turns on a dime. Look at that R&D Suzuki. Look at Tomac. Look at all Treadle. Look at all those Ben Riddle, all those badasses on a Suzuki, right? Well, those bikes could go on the inside because they had a very small wheelbase.
He said he's going to get back on too, so that'll be great.
Yeah.
Pick up the convo. Yeah, I agree. Right
Here he is right here. We'll bring him in.
Checking it's details that matter. This is, I'm geeking out on this particular thing.
Yep, I'm right
there, Tony.
He's dialing in here. And that's why I say the difference between fact and truth.
Because there's a huge difference between, exactly, right?
There's a difference between a fact and there's a difference between the truth. So if a riding coach is saying drag the front brake shortens the wheelbase and it's going to make it turn, that's a given. Tony, thank you so much for coming back, man. Finish your thoughts. So you're racing PWs in the backyard?
Okay, yeah. So sorry about that. My battery died. I didn't know we were. Yeah, it was crazy that we talked that long already.
It's crazy. Thank you.
So back in those days, we had these PWs that we would race in all the backyards. John Faulkner, who's the son of the PAX racing guy, Don Faulkner. Anyway, he was part of the group, and they had all these elaborate tracks that people would build in the backyards, right? And like over and under, there was this one up in Thousand Oaks called Langtown. Maybe you could probably Google it.
Langtown's on YouTube. It's amazing.
You'd be amazed, right? So these are the kind of things that the kids would do and ride and race, and people would sit up on the walls and they'd cheer. It was almost like just like little pro PW racing. But I mean, that stuff was going on even at that time, right? And yeah, the $50 to win and 25 for second and 10 for third. Yeah. So those rewards are going on even then, right?
So Mike, still to this day, you throw a little money on the line, he gets a little competitive.
Coin operated guy, right? So yeah.
Well, we were
what
just
motivates you, Tony?
Oh, I like to win, right? And so that's what really drives me. You know, even if we can just get one here or there, or whatever. I mean, even a heat race win, anything like that. I mean, it's what drives me.
That's awesome. When your battery died there, we were just complimenting the ideology that your boys, it was all about enjoy what you earn instead of this entitlement attitude. And, you know, I think it's difficult. Derek and I have spoken about this on this show previously. You know, you work with a young athlete through the 85 class, they get that 4-year deal, you know, 2 more years as amateur, 1 year on a 250 and then 1 year pro. As soon as they're making $200,000-300,000, they're too cool for school. They don't want to listen to what they've tired of hearing your voice for 4 years. They move on, you know, they shit the bed. The wheels come off the bus because now they're overtraining, or maybe they're not training at all because they're making $300,000 and they think they're rich. And in fact, I just put a video out. It's called "Why Am I Considered the Asshole?" And it essentially just surmises what we're talking about, where you know what you've done to enjoy the success. And then when you get to that point of success, then you're too cool for school to listen. Then you go and you blow yourself apart. And then you want to come back and spend my time and my staff's resources to fix what you've proactively screwed up. And then when I say no, then I'm the asshole. I just find that very ironic. I've taken the time to educate you on the principles of physiology. We were talking about it while you were getting your battery back. There's a difference between facts and truth. You know, nobody would argue if you shorten the wheelbase like a Suzuki, the bike's going to turn quickly. So if you don't get aggressive with the front brake, you're not going to be on that inside line. It's just fact. But then when you get with riding coaches and, well, you can't go work with Tony, because if you work with Tony, I'm not going to work with you. And if you go to Derek, I'm not going to work with you. And what we were saying is each of us could be saying the same thing, say it slightly different, and it resonates with somebody. All the pieces of the puzzle click, then you're off to the races. So we were talking about how it's so high school heady that people get butthurt. Oh, you went over here? Well, you can't come back over here. You went over here. You can't come back over here. It's different in my world because I'll work with someone for 8 or 9 years. I'm not saying, I'm not comparing. Those are two different comparisons. If you go and you overcook yourself on volume and intensity and you don't eat enough and you don't sleep enough and you know better, that's different than deciding with 2 different riding coaches whether you should stand up or sit down in a corner, whether you should use 1 or 2 fingers on the front brake. That's what we were talking about when we were waiting for you to come back. So, well, man, Tony, we know that you're a busy man. Is there anything that you would impart on our listeners based on everything that you've learned over the years and where you're at even currently? If you had a nugget of knowledge, what would you leave them with?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing is you have to to make sure that the rider is the one that's wanting to do this, right? There's a lot of parents that are out there that they want to do it, you know, and you better just make sure before you start investing a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money, that it's what the rider really wants, right? I see a lot of it out there these days where the parents want it more than the rider. That's a problem, you know. If that rider is not waking up before you and talking to you about stuff about the track or about bikes or about whatever, you might want to reconsider what you're doing a little bit, right? Because I see a lot of it going on out there right now, and kind of reminds me of a story from a long time ago. I remember I had the kids out at a track that was near Joe Sutter's in Camarillo. It was a track where they had a wood cutting place. I think it was called Hagel Lumber track up there in the hills. And the kids were 65 riders at the time. And we were out there, you know, we were already out there for maybe 2 hours, you know, doing motos, doing riding. And along comes 2 pro riders, Billy Payne and another one, I can't remember what, RJ. And I remember they showed up, they rode for 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and they were packing up. And I remember asking them, hey, are you guys done? And they're like, yeah, we're going to the movies. And I remember them when they drove away, right? And I said, you see those 2 guys right there? You'll be beating those guys when you're probably 15 or 16 years old. And all of that kind of came to pass, right? At some point in time or another. But again, it's, you know, there are parents out there that can finance it and fund it and do it all, but I think you better be clear on the fact that that's what your kid wants to do, right? Because it could be a lot of wasted money and energy and effort.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just gonna say, and then unfortunately resentment is right behind it, and then you've obliterated the whole father-son, mom-daughter-son relationship, which is sad, because then how many people do we know they don't have relationships with their parents anymore? So I agree with you. Go ahead, Derek.
I see it, you know, I see it, the parents, you know, they invest all this time. I see the moms, they're going to those training facilities and they're living there and sacrificing everything, right, to go do it. And I'm looking at I look at the kid and I'm like, that kid don't even want to be here. Kid's lazy. That kid don't want to do this, right?
Yep.
And it's just like, yeah, I could see how that could turn ugly in the future. It's like, I gave everything for you and did everything for you, and you didn't do it. You didn't make it. You didn't try, whatever it is, right? But you never asked the question, right? Did the kid really want to do it? And I know I've said this a couple of times, even for good pro riders, right? There's a lot of pro riders out there that, I mean, teams are investing lots of money and working on their starts, you know, like crazy technology to get these guys to get starts. And I've asked them, I said, hey, have you talked to the rider? Are you sure the guy wants to get the start? He might not want to, right? He might not want the responsibility of leading that race, right? And I think you got to get that part clear from the get-go. Like I said, for me, when it was Mike, I mean, I never saw a guy so committed to doing it and wanting to be the best, right? I mean, it was the beginning of every conversation in the morning, and it was the last conversation in the evening. You know what I'm saying? And the only time that might have got altered in any way is maybe if he, you know, spent a day or 2 off, right? Maybe at the girlfriend's house or whatever it was, which is now his wife, by the way.
Yep.
Then he would come back, and it took me a couple of days to get him going again, right? But typically, I would say 90% of the time, right? It was all he thought about.
That's awesome.
We always ask these questions to our guests, and so I'd pose it to you is, it doesn't have to be political. It could be whatever you want to say. It could be political. It could be changes of structure. What would you like to see changed within amateur motocross? And I actually, we think the sport's kind of headed this way with futures. I think that's a great addition to the sport. But what would you like to see if you could wave a magic wand? What would you like to see in American motocross change from your perspective on the amateur side of things?
Yeah, well, I'll probably make somebody mad with this for sure. I would definitely like to see the tracks not be in the middle of nowhere. I'd like to see more of an urban setting. I'd like to see the tracks smaller and more technical and in a city square. I'd like to see mostly electric, not gas. Um, and I'd like to, kind of make it look and feel like an event, right? Like a Supercross event, similar, but in a city square. Maybe you take over a park for the weekend or the week. I don't think that the racing needs to be a week long. I don't think it needs to be in the middle of nowhere. I think it hurts families to do that. I think there needs to be a shorter venue. I think there needs to be walking distance to restaurants and hotels and bars and where the public is around to see it. I think that that's where it needs to go, right? Like I said, I could miss the mark on this, but I think that the wives are happier with that. They can walk around in nice shoes and not be walking around in the dirt. And if they want to go over to the hotel for an hour, it's walking distance. I think it just would improve the whole entire amateur scene 1,000%.
I think that future vision is fantastic. We've discussed this a little bit. I mean, yeah, I actually, but if I could, we have talked a little bit about this, me and Rob, but I'm just not blown away, but blown away that somehow we can't work this into a collegiate sport. Like you could have a huge collegiate network and make it something that is, especially with electric, I see that being more feasible than ever. To me, that's just unbelievable. Like in any other sport, you go to college to become a pro. In our sport, you drop out of college to become a pro. And granted, you have a young window, but if we could get more awareness and whatnot, and just even if it wasn't at the pro level, but it was just like a collegiate activity, just like football and all these other activities are, I think that'd be great. And maybe that vision like you have, which is electric, which is coming, let's be clear, is definitely going to be an interesting future to say the least.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I kind of see that as the direction. I mean, I'm sure you've been out there. You guys have been out there to those events where you're out there for a week long, and I think it's hard on the families. I think it's hard on the kids. I think it's hard in general, And I think if those are shortened up, and you have shorter races and you have more intensity in trying to win on smaller tracks that are kind of almost like Supercross, right? I mean, let's be real. Supercross is 58-second lap times, right? Kind of a similar scenario, but more kind of outdoorsy and amateur style. And if you could have that kind of in an urban setting, like a downtown, city, in a city square, and you have people around and you keep the walk, and the people that are walking around are in nice shoes and they're on concrete and it's clean and they have access to, restaurants, bars, etc. I think that's where the sport grows. Putting races in the middle of nowhere and making people sit out there for 5-6 days and no public basically comes to watch it. I can't see any value in that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, the value is all the promoter, right? The value is in who is the guard and who makes the money now, not the few. And that's not a negative. That's just how America evolved to where we got to. It is what it is. If you ran the sport the way it's run now, you would do the same thing,
I do think it's antiquated though.
I agree. I agree.
It's not the future.
No, absolutely.
Well, you're kind of starting to do that on your own, right? You're starting a little bit of a Stasic series and trying to get that young kids kind of going on that.
We've been doing that for about 7 or 8 years now, but yeah. I mean, I think that we have a good kids program that goes on. It's at Glen Helen, and we have a couple of tracks there. We have Stasic track and we have a mini track, and it's all kid friendly. We're really strict with the behavior of the parents at those tracks. We have a 0 tolerance policy for any kind of aggravated behavior, for lack of better words. And everybody goes there. Everybody's friends. The families all talk to each other. The kids like each other. It's a good social program for everybody. And it's a good place for the kids to start learning. I mean, we have a lot of young kids there that are, 2 years old, 3 years old, all the way up. A lot of the kids have come through that program that you see right now. Racing Pro, Julian Bomer came through that program. Ryder T. Francisco came through that program when they were little kids, and many more that I'm not thinking of right now. But a lot of them have come through that as little kids, right? And it's now you see them out there racing pro.
That's super cool.
That's so cool.
It's pretty cool, right?
Cool, Tony.
Well, and that's with that thread of thought, Tony, we want to say thank you, because that's the reason, the genesis behind this whole podcast is you have such a plethora of knowledge and obviously experience. And we'd love to have you come back with, maybe when you get some time. We know you're busy, because we know that your insight is going to make life a little bit easier for parents. They won't make those same mistakes. And on behalf of all of our listeners and subscribers, we just want to say thank you so much. Derek, always a pleasure to have you, brother. Deeply appreciate it. On behalf of Complete Racing Solutions, Coach Robb Podcast Network, and our buddies at Lit Pro, we want to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next month. Be safe.